It was a Saturday evening almost 24 years ago today, on November 4th, 1995. Diane and I had spent Shabbat at the University of Connecticut Hillel House. One of the several jobs I had while I was in rabbinical school was to travel to the University of Connecticut Hillel for several Shabbatot during the year. The Catholic Newman Center was next door, and that's where we stayed overnight. They had bedrooms, while the Hillel House did not. Each Shabbat we spent in Connecticut, we led a Friday night service, had a dinner with the students, and then led a Shabbat morning service followed by lunch, and then we'd come back Saturday afternoon and have a Havdalah service and discussion on Saturday evening. But this Shabbat, it turned out, was going to be different. As we returned to the Hillel House on Saturday evening for Havdalah, we were greeted by a few of the students with shocked and tearful faces. They had heard on the news that the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, had been assassinated that night in Tel Aviv. It was an agonizing Havdalah. We finished the brief ceremony and turned on the television to watch the news coverage of this national calamity for the Jewish people. And we sat and cried together in silence. Monday morning, Diane and I were back at the seminary as all the students at JTS gathered very early around a large screen TV to watch the funeral broadcast from Israel. Classes were suspended. Special services and eulogies were delivered by seminary faculty members. We were all mourners that day. We all walked around dazed and bewildered by what had happened. Americans who were alive when President Kennedy was assassinated can clearly remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard the terrible news. And so too, nearly every Jew can remember what he or she was doing that Saturday night when this great man's life was violently ended all too soon. Yitzhak Rabin had served his country as Israeli Defense Force Chief of Staff, as a diplomat, and as the 5th Prime Minister of the State of Israel. He was born in Jerusalem in 1922, the son of an ardently labor Zionist family. After finishing high school, Rabin joined the Palmach, the elite strike force of the Haganah Underground Defense Organization. He distinguished himself as a military leader during his 7 years of service in the Palmach, and then in the IDF for 2 decades. In 1962, he was appointed Chief of the General Staff, and it was under his leadership that the IDF became renowned as a superior military force, ultimately achieving an astonishing victory in 1967 with the Six-Day War. In 1968, after 26 years in uniform, Rabin retired from the IDF, and he was appointed as the ambassador to the United States. During his 5 years in Washington, he strove to consolidate bilateral ties and played a major role in promoting strategic cooperation with the United States. Upon his return to Israel in 1973, he became a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and in April of 1974, following the nearly disastrous Yom Kippur War, Golda Meir resigned as prime minister, even though an independent commission determined she had acted wisely with common sense and speedily. The Knesset then voted in May to form a new government led by Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin was the first native-born prime minister. He displayed a leadership style which was candid, direct, and by no means sugar-coated. He not only had to face the need to rehabilitate the IDF, solve social problems, and improve the country's economy, but also to rebuild public confidence in both the military and its civilian leadership. This task was complicated by domestic scandals, growing industrial unrest, and personal rivalry within the government. In July of 1976, the government headed by Yitzhak Rabin ordered the famous Entebbe operation, the rescue of Air France passengers who were hijacked by terrorists to Uganda. In this daring operation, thousands of miles from home, the hostages were freed and flown to safety in Israel. Rabin resigned as prime minister and leader of the Labor Party prior to the 1977 elections. During the next 2 decades, Rabin continued to serve as a member of the Knesset. For 6 years, from 1984 to 1990, he was Minister of Defense in 2 national unity governments. In 1992, Rabin was selected chairman of the Labor Party, and after the elections in June, he began his second tenure as prime minister and also defense minister. Rabin's second term as prime minister was marked by 2 historic events: the Oslo agreements with the Palestinians and the treaty with Jordan. Working closely with Shimon Peres, the foreign minister and his longtime rival, he masterminded negotiations on the Declaration of Principles signed with the PLO at the White House in September of 1993. This won Rabin, Peres, and unfortunately also Arafat the 1994 Nobel Peace Prize. It also marked the beginning of negotiations with the Palestinians, which were intended to conclude with the establishment of a Palestinian state living side by side in peace with the Jewish state of Israel. Diane and I were actually in Israel in October of '94 when the peace treaty was signed with the Kingdom of Jordan. This encouraged the development of ties with additional Arab countries in North Africa and the Persian Gulf. Despite individual acts of terrorism perpetrated mostly by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, our year in Israel was marked by a sense of euphoria over the developing peace process. But not everyone in Israel supported the peace process. There were many who felt Arafat could not be trusted, and eventually, of course, they were proven to be right. Most of the dissenters in Israel spoke harshly of Rabin and the peace process, as you might expect in a vigorous democracy engaging in a bold but potentially dangerous bid for peace. Some of the opposition, however, used unforgivable language, calling the government a Mamshelet Zadon, a reign of iniquity, calling it a Judenrat, the term used for the Jewish community councils that cooperated with the Nazis in deporting their Jewish populations, and even calling Rabin a boged, a traitor. Rabin they called a traitor. Rabin, who was a courageous war hero who led the capture of the old city of Jerusalem in 1967, and who became a courageous political leader, daring to make peace with a protracted enemy. Disagreement with the peace process is legitimate in a democracy, but calling a war hero a traitor? It was this type of rhetoric, many believe, that led to the foundation for a religious fanatic to take matters into his own hands. And perhaps this is a lesson we would do well to contemplate in our own political world today. Words do matter. When this crazed young man, and I won't mention his name because he does not deserve the recognition, did what he did, all of Israel was aghast. Here was a young man who had learned in yeshiva. He'd become a law student. How could he have done such a horrendous act? I read several lectures at the time given in a prominent liberal Zionist yeshiva, Yeshiva Har Etzion, in the days following this catastrophic crime. The rabbis there, some of whom may have disagreed with some of Rabin's policies, nevertheless roundly condemned this act of treachery in their sermons to their students. They pointed out the countless fundamental errors in thinking of anyone who might even conceive of justifying this heinous act of murder. Jewish law, they held, absolutely forbids such a monstrous act, and they demanded of their students serious soul-searching for any actions or words that they may have said or done that could possibly have been misconstrued to support this despicable deed. Now, some 24 years later, we should remember Yitzhak Rabin as a courageous warrior, a straight-talking politician, a thoughtful man who wanted only the best for the country he himself helped to build with his own hands. Rabin's yahrzeit is the 12th of Mar Cheshvan, which was last Sunday, but Israel continues to mark his death by the secular date, I believe, November 4th, as a day of national mourning. His murderer, on the other hand, sits in prison to this day, where he justly belongs and will remain in prison for the rest of his life. It is an awful and heartbreaking irony that the night Rabin was murdered, he was attending a mass rally for peace, held under the slogan, "Yes to peace, no to violence." It was, alas, another time. Although peace has proven elusive, we should never give up hope. We should never give in to despair. I'm not so naive to think that peace is just around the corner, but we should continue to support whatever little steps can be taken to create an atmosphere that might eventually lead to some resolution of this tragic conflict. In any case, in his remarks that night to the crowd, Rabin said, "Permit me to say that I am deeply moved. I wish to thank each and every one of you who have come here today to make a stand against violence and for peace. This government, which I am privileged to head, together with my friend Shimon Peres, decided to give peace a chance, a peace that will solve most of Israel's problems. I have always believed that the majority of people want peace and are ready to take risks for peace. In coming here today, you demonstrate, together with many others who did not come, that the people truly desire peace and oppose violence. Violence erodes the basis of Israeli democracy. It must be condemned and isolated. This is not the way of the state of Israel." And then Rabin joined the crowd in singing a song for peace, Shir L'Shalom, a song that for me will always stick in my throat because of the tragic events of that night. The translation of the song includes these words: "Let the sun rise and give the morning light. The purest prayer will not bring us back he whose candle was snuffed out and was buried in the dust. A bitter cry won't wake him, won't bring him back. Nobody will return us from the dead, dark pit. Here, neither the victory cheer nor songs of praise will help. So sing only a song for peace. Do not whisper a prayer. Better sing a song for peace with a big shout." At the funeral 24 years ago, all the eulogies brought tears to our eyes, but the eulogy of then President Clinton is the one I will always remember. He was obviously well coached by his Jewish staff because he referred to the Torah portion of the week, which happens to be the Torah portion for this Shabbat as well. Here is what Clinton said: "This week, Jews all around the world are studying the Torah portion in which God tests the faith of Abraham, patriarch of the Jews and Arabs. He commands Abraham to sacrifice Yitzhak. Take your son, the one you love, Yitzhak. As we all know, as Abraham, in loyalty to God, was about to kill his son, God spared Yitzhak. And now God tests our faith even more terribly, for he has taken our Yitzhak. But Israel's covenant with God for freedom, for tolerance, for security, for peace, that covenant must hold. That covenant was Prime Minister Rabin's life's work, and now we must make it his lasting legacy. His spirit must live on in us. The Kaddish, Clinton pointed out, never speaks of death, but often speaks of peace. And in its closing words, may our hearts find a measure of comfort and our souls the eternal touch of hope. Osei shalom bimramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May the one who makes peace in the heavens above make peace for us, for all of Israel, and together let us say amen." And then President Clinton concluded with these two words in Hebrew, simply, Shalom chaver, goodbye friend. Shabbat shalom.